Tonight, we journey back to an age so distant that even the oldest kingdoms of Middle-earth had not yet been born. The sun had never risen. The moon had never crossed the heavens. Instead, the world was illuminated by two radiant trees whose silver and golden light bathed the blessed realm in an endless twilight. It was an age of beauty, of wonder, and, slowly, of pride. Among the greatest of the elves who ever lived was a king remembered not only for his courage, but for his wisdom, patience, and unwavering sense of duty. A warrior who challenged the Dark Lord himself. Ruler whose final ride became one of the greatest acts of defiance in all of Tolkien's legendarium. His name was Fingolfin. If you enjoy these quiet journeys through the history and lore of Middle-earth, consider leaving a like and subscribing. It truly helps the channel and allows me to continue creating these peaceful stories for long evenings and restful nights. Now, let the fire burn low. Settle into your chair and let us return to the First Age, long before the Fellowship, long before Sauron, to the blessed realm of Valinor. In those ancient days, before sorrow entered the hearts of the Noldor, peace ruled the western lands. Beyond the great sea lay Angband, the undying lands. There, beneath the light of the two trees, the Valar had built shining cities and endless gardens where no sickness touched the living and no winter ever came. Time itself seemed gentler there. The years passed without haste. Every flower bloomed in perfect season. The rivers flowed as clear as polished crystal. Birdsong echoed through forests untouched by fear. It was within this blessed land that the Noldor became the greatest craftsmen among all the elves. They delighted in knowledge, in music, in language. Above all, they loved creation. Where other peoples found joy in forests or starlight, the Noldor found equal happiness shaping stone, forging metal, and uncovering forgotten wisdom. Their greatest king during those peaceful years was Finwë, wise, patient, beloved by his people. He had led the Noldor westward during the Great Journey, and eventually founded the magnificent city of Tirion upon the green hill of Tuna. Its white towers overlooked the plains of Valinor, while, in the distance, the two trees filled the sky with silver and gold. Few cities in the history of Arda were ever as beautiful. Finwë's first wife was Miriel Serinde. Among the elves, she was renowned for her remarkable skill with weaving and embroidery. Yet, after giving birth to her only son, her strength was strangely spent. She chose to lay down her life and pass into the halls of Mandos. It was an event almost without precedent, for elves were immortal. Death belonged to another race. The loss left Finwë heartbroken. His young son, Fëanor, grew without his mother. Many believe that wound remained with him throughout his entire life. Years later, Finwë did something no elf had ever done before. With the blessing of the Valar, he married again. His second wife was Indis of the Vanyar. Gentle in spirit and kind in heart, she brought warmth back into the royal household. Together they had several children. The eldest was Fingolfin. From the moment of his birth, he seemed remarkably different from his older half-brother. Where Fëanor burned like a brilliant flame, Fingolfin resembled steady light. Calm, where others became angry, thoughtful where others rushed forward. Even as a child, he possessed quiet dignity. Many who later served him remarked that he inspired confidence simply through his presence. Unlike Fëanor, he rarely sought admiration, yet people trusted him almost instinctively. As the princes grew older, their differences became increasingly clear. Fëanor's mind raced endlessly from one idea to the next. His hands created wonders no other craftsman could imagine. He possessed extraordinary gifts, perhaps greater than any elf before or after. But brilliance often walked beside pride. Fëanor believed no one could equal him. And perhaps he was right. Fingolfin never attempted to compete with his brother's unmatched genius. Instead, he cultivated different strengths. He studied leadership, history, the customs of the Eldar. He trained with sword and spear until few could rival his skill. He listened more than he spoke. When disagreements arose among the Noldor, Fingolfin often sought peace before victory. The people noticed. Many loved Fëanor for his greatness. Many trusted Fingolfin for his character. At first, the royal household remained united despite these differences. Finwë loved all his children deeply. He hoped they would one day rule together in harmony. But harmony can be fragile, especially where pride already exists. Fëanor never entirely accepted his father's second marriage. Though he respected Indies outwardly, resentment lingered beneath the surface. He viewed Fingolfin and his younger brothers not simply as family, but as rivals. Not because they sought his place, but because he feared they might someday receive part of the love he believed belonged only to him. Fingolfin, for his part, made repeated efforts to preserve peace. The chronicles speak often of his patience. He showed his elder brother every honor due to him. He acknowledged Fëanor's unmatched talents. He never openly challenged his position within the family. Yet even patience cannot always overcome suspicion. Slowly, almost invisibly, the first cracks began to appear within the House of Finwë. Far away, another mind watched these divisions with growing interest. Melkor, the mightiest of the Ainur. Long imprisoned for his crimes, he had eventually been released after centuries of apparent repentance. Many believed he had changed. The Valar hoped imprisonment had humbled him. Outwardly, Melkor appeared courteous. He spoke with wisdom. He praised the accomplishments of the elves. Yet beneath every smile lingered the same ancient hatred that had once driven him to rebel against the Creator himself. He understood something many others overlooked. Strong kingdoms rarely fell because of enemies outside their walls. They fell when distrust entered the hearts of those within. Melkor, therefore, did not begin with armies. He began with whispers, quiet conversations, carefully chosen words, small suggestions planted like seeds. To some, he hinted that the Valar wished to control the elves forever. To others, he suggested that Fingolfin secretly desired the kingship. Among the Noldor, no one proved more vulnerable to such lies than Fëanor. Already proud, already suspicious, he began seeing enemies where none truly existed. Fingolfin noticed the growing tension. He attempted once more to preserve peace. Again and again, he approached his older brother with respect. Again and again, misunderstandings only deepened. One day, those quiet resentments would erupt into open conflict. But for now, Valinor remained peaceful. The two trees still shone. Children laughed in the streets of Tirion. The fountain still sang beneath silver light. No one yet understood how close they stood to the greatest tragedy in Elven history. Not even Fingolfin, for the noble prince still believed that wisdom could heal every wound. Soon, he would learn that some wounds ran far deeper than even the wisest heart could mend. The years of peace did not end all at once. There was no single morning when the people of Tirion awoke to discover that happiness had vanished. Instead, it slipped away little by little, like the fading light before nightfall. Melkor continued moving quietly among the Noldor. He rarely spoke outright lies. He preferred something far more dangerous: half-truths, a carefully chosen word, a lingering question, a doubt left unanswered. Soon, whispers spread throughout Tirion. Some claim that Fingolfin secretly wished to replace his elder brother. Others insisted that the Valar favored the younger prince and intended to limit Fëanor's growing influence. Neither accusation was true. But suspicion, once planted, has a remarkable way of growing by itself. Fëanor became increasingly isolated. His extraordinary gifts remained unmatched, yet he trusted fewer people with each passing year. Even friends found him difficult to approach. His temper, already fierce, became sharper still. Fingolfin watched these changes with growing concern. He never answered insult with insult. Whenever disagreements arose, he chose restraint. Many later believed this patience to be weakness. It was anything but. To remain calm while another's anger rises requires far greater strength than simply answering rage with rage. Yet, patience alone could not undo the poison Melkor had already spread. Eventually, the growing tension reached its breaking point. Before many witnesses, Fëanor openly accused Fingolfin of seeking the crown of the Noldor. His words echoed through the streets of Tirion. Fingolfin stood in stunned silence. Never had he desired his father's throne. Never had he acted against his brother. Yet no explanation could calm Fëanor's fury. Then, in one terrible moment, Fëanor drew his sword. Steel flashed beneath the light of the two trees. He threatened the life of his own brother. For perhaps the first time in the history of Valinor, violence entered the royal house of the Noldor. The Valar could no longer ignore what had happened. They summoned Fëanor before their judgment. After hearing every account, they pronounced their decision. Fëanor would leave Tirion. For 12 years, he would live in exile at Formenos, the great fortress he had built in the northern hills. Finwë made a choice that revealed the depth of his love. Rather than remain in comfort as king, he chose to accompany his eldest son into exile. It was an act of compassion, one that left Fingolfin ruling the Noldor and Tirion while his father lived apart from the city. Those circumstances had divided the family. Fingolfin never rejoiced. He hoped time would heal what anger had broken. For a while, it seemed possible. But far beyond the mountains of Valinor, Melkor had already begun preparing something far worse. One night, the light of the two trees suddenly failed. Without warning, darkness spread across Aman. Not ordinary darkness, a deep and unnatural shadow, unlike anything the elves had ever known. Ungoliant, the monstrous spirit of insatiable hunger, had joined Melkor in his assault upon the Blessed Realm. Together, they poisoned Telperion and Lorelin. The two trees withered. Their silver and golden light disappeared forever. For the first time since the awakening of the Elves, Valinor lay beneath complete darkness. Confusion swept across the land. The Valar rushed toward the dying trees. The Elves searched desperately for answers. In the chaos, Melkor struck once more. He rode swiftly to Formenos. There, he murdered King Finwë. The first High King of the Noldor fell defending his home. The Silmarils, Fëanor's greatest creations, were stolen. When the news reached Tirion, grief spread through every house. Finwë was gone. The trees were dead. The blessed realm itself seemed forever changed. For Fingolfin, the loss was deeply personal. His father had always believed the family could be reunited. Now, that hope had died with him. When Fëanor returned and discovered what had happened, his sorrow quickly became something far more dangerous: wrath. Standing before the gathered Noldor, he called Melkor by a new name: Morgoth, the Black Enemy. From that day forward, the name would never again be spoken without fear. Then came one of the most faithful moments in all of Tolkien's legendarium. Before an enormous gathering of the Noldor, Fëanor raised his voice. His words burned with passion. He spoke of vengeance, of freedom, of kingdoms waiting across the sea in Middle-earth. He declared that no Valar would keep the Noldor imprisoned in Aemon, while Morgoth possessed the Silmarils. Many listened in silence. Others shouted in agreement. Then Fëanor and his 7 sons swore a terrible oath. They vowed that no matter the cost, no matter who stood against them, friend or foe, elf, man or Vala, they would pursue anyone who withheld a Silmaril from their possession. It was an oath unlike any ever spoken, powerful, irrevocable, and filled with tragedy from the moment it left their lips. Fingolfin listened with a troubled heart. He did not approve. He recognized the danger within such absolute promises, yet he also mourned his father. He also desired justice against Morgoth. Like many others, he found himself caught between wisdom and loyalty. Soon afterward, Fëanor led his followers toward the northern coast. There dwelt the Teleri, the master shipbuilders of the Elves. Their white ships were unlike anything else ever crafted. Fëanor demanded them. The Teleri refused, not from hatred, but because those vessels were dearer to them than treasure. They had built them with their own hands. They would not surrender them willingly. What followed became one of the darkest chapters in Elven history, the first kinslaying. Steel met steel upon the quays of Alqualondë. Elf fought against elf. The sea itself turned red. Cries of grief echoed beneath skies that no longer knew the light of the trees. When Fingolfin and his people finally arrived, confusion filled the harbor. Some believed the Teleri had attacked first. Others saw only their own kin falling. They entered the battle without understanding its beginning. Later, many would carry that sorrow for the rest of their immortal lives. Though Fingolfin had never desired bloodshed, his people were forever marked by it. The stolen ships eventually carried Fëanor and his followers across the sea. Fingolfin expected them to return. Instead, Fëanor betrayed even his own kin. After reaching Middle-earth, he ordered the white ships burned at Losgard. Towering flames consumed the fleet. The smoke rose high into the heavens. Across the water, Fingolfin watched in stunned silence. There would be no return, no rescue. The crossing had become impossible. Many among his people despair. Others urged him to abandon the journey altogether. But Fingolfin looked upon the faces around him. Thousands had followed him. Families, children, warriors, scholars. They had already sacrificed too much to turn back. Quietly, he made his decision. If no ships remained, they would walk. Before them stretched the Helcaraxë, the grinding ice, a frozen wasteland where sea and glacier met beneath endless storms. Even the Valar seldom crossed it. The journey became almost unimaginable. Bitter winds cut through every cloak, shifted beneath weary feet. Many slipped into freezing waters that offered no escape. Food grew scarce. The endless white horizon seemed to promise only more suffering. Yet through every hardship, Fingolfin walked among his people. He did not ride ahead while others struggled behind. He shared every danger, every freezing night, every uncertain step. His courage did not lie only upon the battlefield. It revealed itself most clearly during those long months across the ice. A leader who refused to ask anything of his people that he would not endure himself. When, at last, the distant shores of Middle-earth appeared through the frozen mist, many wept openly. They had survived, but they were forever changed. The blessed realm lay behind them. Their old lives had ended. Ahead waited Beleriand's, Morgoth, and a destiny that none of them could yet imagine. The first sunrise that Fingolfin witnessed in Middle-earth was unlike anything he had ever known. For countless ages, he had lived beneath the silver and golden light of the two trees. Now, the stars alone stretched above the world, cold, ancient, silent. As the weary Noldor emerged from the frozen wastes of the Helcaraxë, they found themselves standing upon the northern shores of Beleriand. Behind them lay suffering beyond imagination. Ahead, a land scarred by the growing shadow of Morgoth. Many collapsed where they stood, not from wounds, but from exhaustion. Children who had crossed the grinding ice fell asleep upon the rocky shore. Warriors laid aside their weapons for the first time in many weeks. Even the strongest among them had begun to wonder whether they would survive the journey. Yet they had endured, because Fingolfin had endured with them. No king could ask for greater proof of loyalty than the road his people had willingly followed. News traveled quickly through Beleriand. The Noldor had come. Not only the followers of Fëanor, but another great host led by his younger brother. The Sindar, ruled by King Fingol in the hidden forests of Doriath, watched these newcomers with caution. Few yet knew the full truth of what had happened in Aman. Fewer still understood the sorrow carried by the exiles. For a brief time, hope and uncertainty walked together. Not long before Fingolfin's arrival, another great event had already taken place. Fëanor, consumed by anger and eager for vengeance, had rushed toward Angband almost immediately after landing in Middle-earth. His courage was unquestioned, his judgment less certain. The armies of Morgoth withdrew before his initial assault, drawing the Noldor farther north than was wise. Then, the gates of Angband opened. Balrogs emerged. Orcs surrounded the elves from every direction. Fëanor fought like a blazing fire. Even wounded again and again, he he refused to retreat. But no single warrior, however mighty, could stand forever. Mortally wounded by Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs, Fëanor was carried away by his sons. Before his spirit departed the world, he looked once more toward the dark peaks of Thangorodrim. He knew then that neither he nor his sons possessed the strength to overthrow Morgoth alone. His final words warned them of that terrible truth. Then, the greatest craftsman among the Eldar was gone. With Fëanor's passing, the question of leadership immediately arose. Among the Noldor, no one possessed a stronger claim than Fingolfin. He had not sought the crown. Indeed, throughout his life, he had avoided every appearance of ambition. Yet the people looked toward him, not because he was the eldest, but because they trusted him. Thus, Fingolfin became the second High King of the Noldor. It was a heavy honor. He inherited not a peaceful kingdom, but a divided people. The sons of Fëanor still followed their own ambitions. Many remembered old rivalries. The grief of the kinslaying lingered in every heart. Yet Fingolfin understood that division would only strengthen Morgoth. If the elves hoped to survive, they must stand together. One of his earliest acts as High King reflected that wisdom. Rather than ruling through fear or pride, he sought friendship with every people willing to oppose the dark enemy. Messengers traveled throughout Beleriand. Invitations reached Elven kingdoms, great and small. Before long, leaders gathered for a remarkable assembly, remembered as Merith Aderthid, the Feast of Reuniting. Representatives from many realms came together. The Noldor, the Sindar, the Green Elves, lords who had never before shared the same table, now spoke as allies. Songs filled the evening air. Old misunderstandings softened. New friendships began. Though distrust had not entirely vanished, hope returned to Beleriand for the first time since Morgoth's return. Fingolfin had accomplished something no sword alone could ever achieve. He had united hearts. Meanwhile, preparations for war continued. The elves understood that Morgoth would never remain behind the walls of Angband forever. His armies would come again. The only question was when. Rather than launching reckless assaults, Fingolfin established a vast defensive line surrounding the northern approaches to Angband. Fortresses rose upon strategic hills. Watchtowers overlooked mountain passes. Scouts patrolled constantly across the wide plains of Ardgalen. Every road leading south from Morgoth's fortress came under careful observation. This long period became known as the Siege of Angband. It would last for almost 400 years. Few kingdoms in history have known such an extraordinary peace while standing so close to their greatest enemy. The danger never disappeared, yet Morgoth rarely ventured beyond his gates. His orcs remained largely contained within the north. Across the rest of Beleriand, life slowly flourished once more. New cities were built, forests echoed with music. Children were born who had never seen the Blessed Realm. For them, Middle-earth itself became home. Fingolfin ruled wisely throughout those long centuries. He visited distant kingdoms, strengthened alliances, encouraged trade and cooperation between peoples who had once remained strangers. Unlike many kings, he understood that peace required constant effort. It could not simply be declared. It had to be maintained. Those who met Fingolfin often remarked upon his remarkable balance. He possessed great authority without arrogance. great strength without cruelty. Even the proud princes of the Noldor rarely questioned his fairness. His children inherited many of those same qualities. Foremost among them was Fingolfin, brave, generous, and fiercely loyal. Though many remembered the bitter divisions between the houses of Fingolfin and Fëanor, Fingolfin refused to let old hatred define the future. His greatest act came when he learned that Maedhros, eldest son of Fëanor, remained imprisoned upon the cliffs of Thangorodrim. Bound by Morgoth and left to suffer without hope of escape, many believed Maedhros deserved his fate. After all, his family had helped bring disaster upon the Noldor. Fingolfin thought differently. He remembered not old quarrels, but old friendship. Risking his own life, he journeyed alone toward the mountains of Morgoth. With the help of Fëanor, Lord of the Eagles, he rescued Maedhros from captivity. The rescue became one of the defining moments of the First Age. More importantly, it healed a wound that had divided the Noldor for far too long. Grateful beyond words, Maedhros surrendered any claim he might have held to the High Kingship. He acknowledged Fingolfin as the rightful ruler of the Noldor. It was a gesture of humility, almost as remarkable as Fingolfin's courage. For many years afterward, the two great houses stood together once again. The long peace continued. Seasons passed, forests grew, the rivers of Beleriand flowed quietly toward the sea. Many began to hope that Morgoth had finally accepted defeat. But beneath the black peaks of Thangorodrim, the Dark Lord had never been idle. Deep beneath the earth, armies multiplied. Terrible creatures emerged from forgotten pits. Fire gathered beneath the mountains. Morgoth had learned patience. He no longer intended to meet the elves in small battles. He was preparing something vast, something that would shatter 4 centuries of hope in a single terrible day. Soon, the fields of Ardgalen would burn, and Fingolfin would face the greatest trial of his life. For nearly 4 centuries, the siege of Angband endured. Generations of elves came into the world knowing only watchfulness. The northern hills remained guarded. Scouts continued their endless patrols. Messengers rode between hidden kingdoms. Every lord understood that Morgoth still lived beyond the Iron Mountains. Yet year followed year without great battle. To many, it almost seemed as though the Dark Lord had accepted defeat. Children who had never seen war grew into skilled craftsmen. Songs once again echoed through the halls of Nargothrond. The forests of Doriath remained peaceful beneath the enchanted girdle of Melian. Trade flourished between friendly realms. The great kingdoms of the Noldor reached heights of beauty few had imagined possible after the crossing of the Helcaraxë. Even Fingolfin allowed himself cautious hope. He never believed Morgoth had abandoned his hatred. But perhaps the enemy had become weaker than many feared. It was an understandable thought. After all, the gates of Angband had remained closed for centuries. No great army had emerged. No terrible assault had come. The long peace slowly became something dangerous. It became familiar. Yet, beneath the black peaks of Thangorodrim, Morgoth never rested. His orcs multiplied deep beneath the mountains. His smiths forged countless weapons. Olrogs waited patiently in the darkness. Most terrible of all, a new servant had reached maturity. Glaurung, the father of dragons. Years earlier, he had emerged while still young, only to be driven back by the vigilance of the elves. Now he had grown, far larger, far stronger, far deadlier. Morgoth had learned from every previous defeat. The next assault would not rely upon orcs alone. It would reshape the very land itself. Then, without warning, the mountains erupted. Great rivers of flame burst from Thangorodrim. Smoke darkened the heavens. The fertile plain of Ardgolan, which for centuries had remained green beneath the northern sky, suddenly ignited. Fire swept across the grasslands with terrifying speed. The earth itself seemed to burn. Forests vanished beneath choking smoke. The very air became difficult to breathe. The battle that followed became known forever as Dagor Bragollach, the Battle of Sudden Flame. No name could have described it more perfectly. The carefully maintained defenses of the Noldor disappeared within hours. Watchtowers collapsed. Fortresses became isolated. Communication between kingdoms broke down almost immediately. Then the orcs came. Not in scattered raids, not in small war bands, but in numbers greater than anyone had ever witnessed. Wave after wave poured from Angband. Behind them marched trolls, wargs, and creatures whose names have long been forgotten. The northern defenses, which had endured for centuries, began collapsing one after another. The sons of Fëanor fought desperately along the eastern marches. The warriors of Hithlum struggled to contain the flood pouring southward. Everywhere, messengers carried the same terrible news. The line was breaking. Amid the smoke, another shadow appeared. Enormous, wingless, covered in scales harder than steel. Glorung advanced across the burning plain. The first true dragon of Morgoth had entered the war. Fire poured from his jaws. Armor melted. Stone cracked beneath unbearable heat. Many soldiers who had stood bravely against orcs found themselves frozen with fear before the dragon. Never before had they faced such a creature. Entire companies scattered. Even experienced captains struggled to restore order. Though brave warriors eventually forced Glorung to withdraw, the damage had already been done. The ancient peace of Beleriand had ended forever. News reached Fingolfin almost without pause. One fortress lost, then another. The pass of Aglon had fallen. Dorthonion stood surrounded. Countless elves had already perished. Among them were lords whose names had been respected for centuries. The kingdom he had spent hundreds of years protecting now seemed to crumble in every direction. Still, Fingolfin refused despair. He rode constantly between his armies. He encouraged frightened soldiers. He reinforced collapsing defenses wherever possible. His presence alone restored courage. Again and again, warriors who had begun retreating steadied themselves when they saw their king riding among them. That had always been Fingolfin's greatest gift. He inspired hope, not through speeches, but through example. Yet, even the greatest king cannot be everywhere at once. Reports grew steadily darker. Morgoth's armies could not be stopped. The siege was over. The balance of the war had shifted forever. For perhaps the first time since arriving in Middle-earth, Fingolfin allowed himself to see the full truth. No army remained strong enough to overthrow Angband. No alliance seemed capable of restoring what had been lost. Centuries of patient work had vanished in a matter of days. The weight of every death pressed upon him. The long march across the Helcaraxë, the hopes of the Noldor, the trust of his people. the sacrifices made by countless friends. It all seemed to lead toward the same terrible conclusion. Morgoth had won. The chronicles tell us that a great weariness entered Fingolfin's heart, not cowardice, not hopelessness, but the quiet sorrow known only to those who have carried responsibility for many years. He believed he had failed his people, failed the promise of the Noldor. Then something extraordinary happened. Instead of gathering another army, instead of calling another council, Fingolfin made a decision unlike any king before him. He saddled his horse, Rochalor. He dressed himself not in ceremonial robes, but in shining armor. Upon his side hung Ringel, the sword that glittered like ice beneath the stars. He spoke to almost no one. No great announcement echoed through Hiflum. No farewell feast was held. Those who saw him ride north understood only that their king was leaving. They did not know where, nor why. Only later would they realize what Fingolfin had already accepted. He did not ride toward victory. He rode toward destiny. Alone. Toward the black gates of Angband. Toward the greatest evil that had ever entered Arda. Toward Morgoth himself. Soon, the High King of the Noldor would stand before the Dark Lord and challenge him to single combat. The road to Angband had never seemed so empty. Rochalor galloped alone across the scarred plains of Anfoglith, the land once known as Ardgallen before Dragonfire transformed it into a desert of ash. The wind carried the smell of smoke. Black dust drifted across the earth like snow from some forgotten winter. No banners rode beside the High King. No army followed. No horns announced his coming. Only the steady rhythm of a single horse echoed beneath the shadow of Thangorodrim. Many later wondered what thoughts filled Fingolfin's mind during that final ride. Did he think of Tirion beneath the light of the two trees? Of his father, Finwë? Of the long crossing over the Helcaraxë? Or perhaps he thought of none of these things. Perhaps his mind had become perfectly still. For there are moments when a great burden grows so heavy that fear itself simply disappears. The servants of Morgoth saw him first. Orcs watched from broken watchtowers. Scouts hiding among the black rocks stared in disbelief. One lone elf riding openly toward the greatest fortress of evil in the world. Some laughed, others hesitated. None dared stand before him. Such was the light that surrounded Fingolfin, that even the orcs shrank from his path. The High King rode directly to the gates of Angband. Above him rose the smoking peaks of Thangorodrim. The iron mountains seemed to swallow the sky itself. No fortress built by elves or men could compare. Its walls stretched endlessly into darkness. Its gates resembled cliffs of black iron. Within them waited countless armies, Balrogs, dragons, creatures born from Morgoth's hatred. Before those enormous gates, Rochalor finally stopped. Fingolfin dismounted slowly. He placed one hand upon his faithful horse's neck. Then he walked forward alone. Drawing Ringel from its sheath, the High King struck the iron gates with the flat of his sword. The sound rang across the plain like a great bell. Once, twice, 3 times. His voice followed, clear, strong, filled with a courage that no shadow could silence. He called Morgoth by his true name. He named him Coward, Lord of Slaves, Master of Fear. He challenged him to leave the safety of Angband and face the King of the Noldor in single combat. Within the fortress, silence followed. The challenge spread quickly through Morgoth's halls. The Dark Lord heard every word. At first, he hesitated, for Morgoth remembered Valinor. He remembered the strength of the Eldar before the long years of war had weakened them. Though he possessed power beyond imagination, he rarely risked himself unless absolutely necessary. Yet the challenge could not be ignored. Every captain, every Balrog, every servant of Angband had heard Fingolfin's words. If Morgoth remained hidden, their master's pride would suffer. Slowly, the great gates opened. The earth itself seemed to tremble. Then Morgoth emerged. No living creature had ever stood before such a being. He towered above Fingolfin like a mountain clad in black iron. His armor was immense. Upon his head rested the Iron Crown. Within it were set the 3 stolen Silmarils, their holy light forever burning against his brow. In one hand he carried Grond, the hammer of the underworld. Its head seemed large enough to shatter fortress walls. Each step Morgoth took left deep marks in the earth. Yet despite all his size, despite all his terrible power, Fingolfin did not retreat. Not a single step. The duel began. Morgoth struck first. Grond crashed downward with unimaginable force. The earth split apart where the hammer landed. Flames burst from deep beneath the ground, but Fingolfin was already gone. Swift as the wind beneath the stars of Valinor, he moved aside before the blow could reach him. Then Ringel flashed. The blade cut across Morgoth's leg. Dark blood flowed onto the black earth. The Dark Lord had been wounded. For the first time in countless ages, a roar echoed across the mountains. Again Grond fell. Again Fingolfin escaped. Again Ringel struck. The High King moved with astonishing speed. His armor shone beneath the dim northern sky. His blue shield flashed like a fragment of clear heaven amid the smoke of Angband. Again and again, Morgoth tried to crush him. Again and again, the elf slipped beyond the reach of the great hammer. Each time, Ringel found its mark. One wound, then another, then another. The songs tell us that Fingolfin wounded Morgoth 7 times. 7 bright cuts burned across the body of the Dark Lord. Each became a lasting reminder that even the mightiest enemy could bleed. The servants of Angband watched in disbelief. Never before had they seen their master driven backward. Never before had Morgoth known humiliation in battle. The plain before Angband became strangely quiet. Even the orcs forgot to cheer. They watched history unfold. But no courage, however great, can overcome exhaustion forever. Morgoth needed only one mistake, one moment, one step taken a fraction too slowly. At last, it came. Ringel flashed once more, yet this time Grond stirred the ground beside Fingolfin. The earth burst apart beneath the terrible impact. The High King stumbled. Before he could recover, the great hammer descended again. His shield shattered. The blow drove him to one knee. Still, he rose. Again, Morgoth struck. Again, Fingolfin stood. A third terrible blow fell. This time, the noble king could rise no more. Broken upon the black earth, Fingolfin looked up toward the towering Dark Lord. Even then, his spirit remained unbroken. With the last of his strength, he lifted Ringil one final time. The blade pierced Morgoth's foot. Dark blood flowed once again. The wound would never fully heal. From that day until the end of Arda, Morgoth walked with a limp. A permanent reminder of the elf who had dared challenge him alone. Then, Fingolfin, High King of the Noldor, passed from the world. For a brief moment, Morgoth stood silently above his fallen enemy. His rage had overcome victory. Rather than honoring so brave an opponent, he seized the king's body, intending to cast it before the wolves of Angband. But another watcher had witnessed the duel. High above the battlefield circled Thorondor, Lord of the Great Eagles. With a cry that echoed through the northern sky, the mighty eagle descended. His vast wings beat against the smoke. His talons slashed across Morgoth's face, forcing even the Dark Lord to recoil. Before any servant of Angband could react, Thorondor lifted Fingolfin's body from the battlefield, high above Thangorodrim, higher than any arrow could reach. The great eagle carried the fallen king away. He brought him at last to a quiet mountain peak overlooking Gondolin. There, among the lonely heights where only the eagles dared dwell, Turgon laid his father to rest. No orc ever defiled that grave. No shadow reached it. And though Fingolfin's life had ended, his greatest victory was only beginning. For the memory of one lone king, standing without fear before the greatest evil in the world, would inspire hope long after swords had fallen silent. For many years after the duel before Angband, the songs of the Eldar were sung more quietly, not because hope had vanished, but because greatness had been lost. The death of Fingolfin echoed across every elven kingdom in Beleriand. Messengers carried the news through hidden forests and mountain passes. In Nargothrond, voices fell silent. In Doriath, even those who had never followed the High King mourned his passing. In Gondolin, Turgon stood upon the walls of his hidden city, knowing that he would never again look upon his father's face. Yet grief alone did not define Fingolfin's legacy. Something else endured, something far stronger than sorrow. Hope. It would have been easy for the Noldor to surrender after Dagor Bragollach. Their northern defenses had fallen. Countless warriors were dead. The High King himself had perished. Many kingdoms might have collapsed beneath such losses. The Elves did not. Because Fingolfin had spent centuries building more than armies. He had built trust. His son, Fingon, now inherited the High Kingship. Few rulers have ever accepted a heavier burden. He received no peaceful kingdom, no secure borders, only a realm surrounded by enemies and grieving the greatest king it had ever known. Yet Fingon possessed many of his father's finest qualities. He ruled with generosity rather than pride. He strengthened old alliances. He continued protecting those who could no longer defend themselves. Most importantly, he refused to allow Morgoth's victory to become complete. The struggle continued, and in many ways, that was exactly what Fingolfin had hoped for. He had never believed his duel would destroy Morgoth. That had never been its purpose. His challenge reminded every free people of Beleriand that the Dark Lord could still be opposed, that courage still existed, that even the greatest shadow could be forced to bleed. Among Tolkien's readers, one question has endured for decades. Was Fingolfin truly the greatest elven king? It is a difficult question, for the First Age was filled with extraordinary rulers. Thingol governed Doriath for thousands of years beneath the protection of Melian. Finrod Felagund founded Nargothrond and became beloved by elves, dwarves, and men alike. Turgon created Gondolin, perhaps the most beautiful hidden city ever built. Each possessed remarkable wisdom. Each left an enduring legacy. Yet Fingolfin stands apart, not because he built the greatest kingdom, nor because he achieved the greatest military victories, but because he embodied balance. He possessed courage without recklessness, wisdom without hesitation, authority without arrogance. Even before becoming High King, he repeatedly placed the needs of his people above his own pride. When Fëanor insulted him, Fingolfin answered with restraint. When the Helcaraxë threatened to destroy his followers, he walked beside them. When old divisions weakened the Noldor, he sought reconciliation instead of revenge. These were not the actions of a man seeking glory, they were the actions of a king. It is perhaps impossible to speak of Fingolfin without also speaking of Fëanor. The two half-brothers could hardly have been more different. Fëanor burned brightly. His genius changed the history of Arda forever. The Silmarils remain the greatest works ever crafted by the children of LOTR. Yet brilliance often came at a terrible cost. His pride divided families. His terrible oath led countless innocent people into suffering. His anger rarely allowed patience to guide his decisions. Fingolfin represented another path. He possessed neither Fëanor's unmatched craftsmanship nor his fiery charisma. Instead, he offered stability. Where Fëanor inspired awe, Fingolfin inspired confidence. Where one often acted from passion, the other acted from duty. Neither brother lacked courage, but only one consistently placed the good of others before himself. Perhaps Tolkien intended them to represent two very different forms of greatness, one dazzling, one enduring. When readers remember Fingolfin, however, they almost always return to the same image, a lone rider crossing the ash-covered plain before Angband. Why? Because that single moment captures everything he had become. He knew he could not win. He knew Morgoth possessed strength beyond measure. He rode anyway, not because he expected victory, but because some acts possess value regardless of their outcome. Tolkien often returned to that idea throughout his writings. The greatest heroes are not always those who succeed. Sometimes they are those who choose to stand when defeat seems certain. Fingolfin belongs to that company. Just as Theoden charged upon the Pelennor fields knowing the odds against him. Just as Frodo carried the ring, though he believed it would destroy him. Just as Sam continued climbing Mount Doom when every step seemed impossible, Fingolfin chose hope over despair. His story became hope over despair. His story became one of Tolkien's purest expressions of courage. Even Morgoth remembered him. The wound Ringel left upon the Dark Lord's foot never fully healed. From that day until his final defeat beyond the circles of the world, Morgoth walked with pain. It was a small wound compared to his vast power, yet its meaning reached far beyond the flesh. The mightiest being in Middle-earth carried, for the rest of his existence, the mark of one elf's courage. That is no small legacy. In the years that followed, kingdoms would fall. Gondolin would eventually be discovered. Nargothrond would perish. Doriath itself would know sorrow. The First Age would end in fire, grief, and the War of Wrath. Many of the greatest elves would leave Middle-earth forever, yet the memory of Fingolfin endured through every age that followed. Thousands of years later, when Aragorn reclaimed the throne of Gondor, when Galadriel still walked beneath the trees of Lorien, when Elrond looked west across the sea, the ancient stories of the First Age had already become legend. But among those legends, few names inspired greater respect than Fingolfin. Not because he was the strongest, not because he lived the longest, but because he remained faithful to his people from beginning to end. The fire had burned low. Only glowing embers remained. Above them, the stars shone as they had on the night when the elves first awoke beside the waters of Cuiviénen. Perhaps somewhere beyond those stars, beyond the circles of the world, Fingolfin once again walked beneath a light untouched by shadow. No longer beneath burning skies, no longer carrying the burdens of kingship, only at peace. And here, in the quiet echoes of an ancient tale, we remember not merely the king who challenged Morgoth, but the man who spent his entire life proving that true greatness is measured not by power, but by unwavering courage, steady wisdom, and the willingness to walk beside one's people, even through the darkest ice and into the deepest shadow.